Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yasmin Taj from People Matters, and we are back with an exciting session of our virtual panel discussion in partnership with Harappa Education on the topic The State of Behavioral Learning 2020. Navigating continuous change has become a critical business differentiator. Companies today need employees to become self starters, identify possible opportunities to collaborate cross functionally, and build daily habits that will enable them to work seamlessly and create business leverage. Behavioral skills are a critical component of delivering value to businesses. In this context, employers can't just expect their employees to display behaviors right from when they walk through the door. They need to invest actively in training employees. People Matters and Harappa Education are happy to launch the research study on the state of behavioral learning 2020 in this panel discussion. The study brings together data from 350 companies, a first of its kind research aimed at understanding the priorities, challenges, and opportunity areas for companies on behavioral skills. The study covers strategic priorities on behavioral learning, top challenges and opportunities in behavioral skilling, approach and focus areas on impact measurement. Please feel free to download your copy of the research study, the link we have received in the chat section. And now it is with great pleasure that I invite and introduce our speakers for today. Firstly, we have with us Ruchira Bhardwaj, CHRO Global Talent Management Leader, Future Generali India Life Insurance. Ruchira drives the effective implementation of human resources practices and policies for talent acquisition, performance evaluation, and employee empowerment and engagement in the organization. She is a management graduate from Institute of Rural Management, Anand, and holds an advanced diploma in HR management from NMIMS, Mumbai. A very warm welcome to you, Ruchira.
Thank you, Yasmin. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And next we have with us Surya Prakash Mohapatra, Global Head Talent Transformation, Learning and Development, Wipro. Surya Prakash has over 20 plus years of experience in various leadership roles in several leading IT and ITES organizations. Prior to Wipro, he worked in Hewlett Packard, Microlens, First Ring, Computer Garage, and a few other organizations. Surya has extensive experience in setting up and running and learning and development functions for organizations in India and international locations. Surya set up the global training function for Wipro BPO, which spanned across 10 locations in Brazil, Mexico, Romania, Poland, China, and India. A very warm welcome to you, Surya. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks, Surya. Next, we have with us Nikhil Gambhir, Director, Business and Innovation, Harappa Education. Nikhil is Director, Business and Innovation at Harappa, an EdTech entrepreneur who's worked with 100,000 plus learners over 12 years. He authored Become a Junior Inventor, a DIY experiential learning book for children, and a Stanford Leader in Corporate Innovation, and holds an MBA from the Indian School of Business. Very well, Mom. Welcome to you, Nikhil.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Pleasure to be here.
Great. And finally, we have with us Samta Arora, Director, Learning Impact, Harappa Education. She works at the cusp of education philosophy, learning pedagogy, and behavior impact. She has spent years in public policy education design and is a graduate from Lady Shriram College for Women. Hi, Samta. Warm welcome.
Hi, Yasmin. Very excited to be here and really glad for the report that we're launching today.
Absolutely. Excited here. Yes, I'm looking forward to some great conversation with the four of you. So our partner for today's webcast is Harappa Education. Harappa is an online first learning institution that offers impactful and engaging learning and development programs to help the teams and organizations build cognitive, behavioral, and social skills that are crucial for success at the 21st century workplace. Their motto is to enable growth for your organization through Harappa's high impact online learning journeys, which help individuals and teams think, solve, communicate, collaborate, and lead more effectively. Habits that are uniquely crucial for organizational success. We have also saved time for you to ask your questions at the end of the session. For those who are live, can simply submit post questions at any time during the session. We will try to respond to as many questions as time allows us to. So we have exciting research insights to discuss today. Let me take you through the preview of the key findings before moving on with the panel discussion with our esteemed panelists. So as you can see, businesses around the world are being disrupted as we speak. In an uncertain business world, companies are identifying ways to become future ready. As technical competencies become easier to automate, the focus is now on behavioral skills. skills like critical thinking, collaboration, communication, leadership, and problem-solving skills. And these are more critical than ever before. To understand shifts in behavioral learning, Harappa Education, in partnership with People Matters, launched the State of Behavioral Learning 2020 report. The survey was aimed at benchmarking data on how companies in India are planning and executing their behavioral learning strategy. Next slide, please. A total of 350 companies participated in the study, covering a diverse group of industries and business types. As you can see, the research has validated our hypothesis and cash cautious that most organizations surveyed value behavioral learning. But valuing the skills hasn't led to an easy path to achievement. Most organizations surveyed struggle to create impactful, sustained learning paths for their employees. The research was aimed at surveying strategic priorities on behavioral learning, top challenge and opportunities in behavioral learning, approach and focus areas on impact measurement. And during the course of the research, experts also shared very pressing concerns on behavioral skills, from giving the time needed to develop these skills to personalizing roadmaps. Companies need to design for the individual employee. They can no longer expect the employee to stay engaged with mandatory programs prescribed for the organization at large. Next slide, please. While a majority of the companies, 85% as you can see, that participate in the study said that they already have programs focused on behavioral skills, most of them don't have a personalized behavioral learning roadmap for the employees. This is a key focus area for most HR and LD departments. Experts believe that while the benefits of personalized learning is unparalleled, the roadmap for individual learning is still difficult to establish at scale. Companies are turning to smaller cohorts depending on job-based responsibilities. Next slide. When it comes to personalization and involving employee input in the design process, most companies route their learning programs through the line managers, 51% of them, and 47% said the employees discuss their learning preferences during the goal setting process. Curiously, although a number of companies said that they involve employees, 62% input in the learning process, only 29% of the companies surveyed actually have a personalized learning roadmap. And that's a shocking revelation, actually. And move on to slide 5. Among the top challenges that businesses face with respect to behavioral skills, 69% of the survey responses opted for applying learning to daily work as the topmost challenge. This was followed by uncertain future business environment and limited resources, 54%, indicating that the prevailing business environment due to the global pandemic has adversely affected training on behavioral skills. As companies continue to evaluate their business continuity plans, it is clear that training or additional investment in behavioral learning may not rise in the near future. Moving on, digital tools and resources on behavioral skills today are on par with classroom training and on-the-job training as the most preferred methods to develop or enhance behavioral skills. A number of companies also prefer to invite expert speakers to share their business knowledge and people management skills in a company-wide town hall or through webinars. Also, while mapping behavioral learning to business outcomes is a difficult thing to do, since most behavioral change occurs over a long period of time, companies continue to use a few metrics to assess the effectiveness of the program. Feedback surveys from employees, peers, and managers continue to be a critical input to businesses on behavioral change. And this is also closely followed by performance measures like goals, KRAs at 57% and assessments at 51%. So given the pandemic, a number of companies have chosen to either not invest heavily or to continue with the stack of programs already in place. A majority of the budget on behavioral skills is allocated to senior management or at the manager level. Now let's move on to some suggestions that we have that you can put to use. According to our study, 85% of the companies said that personalization is important. Although in many companies, employees play a role in giving inputs on behavioral skills learning, there's still a need to create personalized learning roadmaps. Given that digital learning today is at par with on-the-job training and classroom training, and it's important to create a digital strategy around behavioral learning. Coaching is as important and an important tool to accelerate behavioral learning. L&D departments need to create coaching programs for the short and the long term. Also, articulate the why of learning in consultation with the line manager and the business. Most experts agree that there is great engagement in the learning process when employees have clarity about how it would help them in the future. So while most companies invest in senior management and executives, research shows that it's important to invest in an employee's career early on, right from when they are a few years into the workplace to the middle management level. And now, without any further delay, let us hear what our speakers have to share with us today on behavioral learning and the trends impacting the industries today. And let's start with the first question that I have for everyone. The question is about the why of behavioral learning. Why has behavioral learning become critical even as skills radically change and a new era of hybrid workplace takes over? So, Ruchira, I would like to begin with you first on this.
Sure. Thanks, Reshma. Thanks for introducing the report to us so succinctly. I must say it's a very detailed findings, and you could just wrap up in 10 minutes. So kudos to Yasmin. See, there has been a paradigm shift in the way we are working, right, and the way we are, and hence the way we are learning, because of the Black Swan event which has happened. Uh, Companies would increasingly look for talent with understanding of managing complex problems, someone who can steer through U, V, W shaped business scenarios, is looking for ability to work, somebody had ability to work in multifarious environment, can manage ambiguous and ambiguity to a larger extent, has higher emotional resilience also, and of course capability to lead a team through these crisis situations. So if this is the entire situation that is currently in front of the HR folks and the leadership people of an organization, if we club that with exactly what are that behavioral tenets that organizations would want to measure or would want to look at or would want to develop, I would really break it down to two things. One is the values, which most of the organizations, if you pick up the values of organizations, you will find there are the core to those values are the behavioral tenets, right? Recently, MIT Sloan School of Management did a survey on company culture, and which provides an analysis on the corporate values espoused by almost, I think, 700 odd large companies. 73% lists between 3 to 7 corporate values, and the top 5 were integrity, collaboration, customer, respect, and innovation. You know, all these has really behavioral tenets at the core of it. That's the first part. The second part is the cultural aspect. Now, manifesting the learning with linkages and connections with the world which is transforming, and the how can we really keep the cultural aspects of the organization intact and strengthen it when people are working remotely. That's where again the behavioral learning plays an extremely critical uh, role, I would say, Yasmin.
Great. Thanks, Richard. I think that's very nicely put together. And the time that we are living it, the way the shifts in the workplace are happening, other skills are critical, not to deny that, but I think behavioral skills going to be even more important now. So, Nikhil, I'll come to you next on the same question of why do you think behavioral learning has become so critical today?
Thank you. And just picking up from Ruchira said, I think it's this whole idea of change, right? And an award-winning historian, Norman Davies, said that you compare historical change to something like an avalanche, where the only certainty for anyone in the path of an avalanche is standing still is really not an option. So I think the nature of problems that we had to solve many years back were technical problems. You could just put together a set of people with the specialized skill set to solve those problems. So problems such as putting the first man on the moon, you could just put your best engineers together to try and solve that, as compared to problems today which are far more adaptive and far more complex. Whether it's education for all, or healthcare for all, or banking for all, I think there's so much of a need to be able to work with people, to be able to solve for some of this. So I think that's, to me, the largest sort of reason why behavioral skills are important. And just to kind of summarize, I'm a tennis fan, so this goes back to how you played tennis 30 years back and how you play tennis today, with respect to the quality of tennis really improving. You have a different court that you have to play on, whether it's a grass court, a clay court, a hard court. The quality of equipment has significantly increased. Your opponent's quality has increased. So I think, how do you think about becoming a Roger Federer for your industry at a time like this? So I think that's just my answer.
Great. I like the analogy of Roger Federer there. Thanks, Nikhil. I'll come to you now, Surya. What do you think about the criticality of behavioral skills? You work with an industry where it's even more important, I think. So please tell us your views on that.
All right. I think Ruchira, Nikhil have talked about what's happening around us, so I don't have to repeat that.
Yeah.
But in situations like this, where there is creative destruction of organizations, industries, and products that's going on all the time, I think options for any leader today or for any professional today are three. You know, one can take the road to perish, or the road to survive, or the road to thrive. There is no other option. So when road to perish probably is also not an option, and then you are left with a choice to survive or thrive. So now in situations like this, how do you really manage self? How do you lead self? Then how do you lead your teams and people around you? And then how to lead the larger ecosystem where you have your organization, your stakeholders, your customers, your partners, and so on. I think in that context, I think behavioral skills has become extremely important. We need those skills to manage ourselves, to manage our teams, to lead our teams, and to lead the larger organization, and then take the organization forward, take the mission of the organization forward, navigate through the complexities and ambiguities, and enable your teams and organizations to do that. So I can't think of a better reason and most stronger reason than this, as to why behavioral skills are extremely important.
Absolutely agree with you. I think, yes, if you don't want to perish and you want to survive and thrive, I think these skills are going to be very important. Sometimes I come to you last on the same question, and I'll actually combine it with the second question that I have for you. So, one is obviously your views on the criticality of behavioral skills in these times. And secondly, how are behavioral learning needs changing? You've been working in this space for so long. And what are some of the new developments and modes of learning, and which skills are being emphasized more now?
Thanks, Yasmin. And Nikhil, Ruchira, and Surya have covered most of the points. And just being a history student, I kind of always try to track the trends to a decade or decades ago to see how they've emerged now. So how I understand is basically, with our markets really opened up in the 1990s when the liberalization happened. And what really happened with liberalization and opening of the market is that in the last 20 years, the change that we have seen is exponential, which we hadn't seen before, 2000 or 1999. I mean, we only remember all these companies coming in. And what really that led to is that it has recently started leading to so much technological disruption that a lot of the skills that we otherwise thought important a decade ago are really becoming more and more redundant. So typically, what we call Industry 4.0, which is going to be the new wave of technological disruption, is almost automating all the technical skills that were required 5 years and 6 years ago. And what we are really left with right now is that has sort of put the focus and brought the behavioral skills to mainstream. And there's so many reports by McKinsey and World Economic Forum 2019 report kind of has emphasized over and over again that businesses now, with more of these skills becoming automated, businesses now need to focus on the behavioral skills. So I think that's largely what happened 2 decades ago. That is sort of changing the business context. And I think just the fact, when we just couple this piece of information with the fact that our educational institutions are still not preparing our workforce with behavioral skills. I mean, how many of us, or people we know and, young people we know who go to schools, how many of us really see that, the schools teaching analytical skills, collaboration, writing, speaking? I mean, these are implicit skills that are being addressed, but they're still not being taught as mainstream subjects. So what really happens is that when you bring all these contexts together, the businesses have really no other option than to assume the responsibility upon themselves to teach skills like this, which, if you just stand back and think, which are very basic, and you assume that people should know something like, how to communicate well and how to collaborate and how to solve problems. So I think the need kind of gets established in this context with how businesses play out, what's happening in the education space. and what's really happened in the economic context in the last 20 years. And moving on, I think, to the next part of the question about how are the needs changing. So I think the report has clearly established that 85% of the stakeholders, 85% of the participants have clearly said that they are implementing behavioral programs. And we don't need any more data to validate that these skills are becoming important. And 71% are even saying that they're personalizing. So I think personalization is the key here, and probably that's the change, and that's the difference with the technical skills, because behavioral skills don't have a one size fits all approach. Behavior is a unique fingerprint each person has. So I think personalization becomes a big challenge and becomes the kind of uh, change that's required in the learning and development, especially when you start focusing on something like behavioral skills. I think the other aspect that's becoming important is that the focus is towards senior leadership and the middle management. Because by then you've already established the technical skills, so you want to sort of start focusing on the on the behavioral skills particularly. Um, I think, of course, in terms of the modes of learning, clearly we've seen a transfer towards digital learning. It has been accelerated in the last 6 months. We had no option. Otherwise, it might have taken another decade to happen. So that's clearly happened. And I think that will be something interesting to watch, by the way, as we move towards digital learning, especially in the context of behavioral skills, which requires application in the workplace. It's actually, behaviors are really more than just grasping the knowledge or the concepts. So what will be interesting to see is that how we're going to start catering to facilitating the practice of these skills, or the application of these behaviors in everyday workplace. I think that's going to be a key differentiator and something interesting to watch out for in the next couple of months and years.
Yes, great points there, great Samta. So I think the whole fact that yes, automation might take away a lot of jobs, but it cannot replace the human skills, the human behavioral skills that people have, and that will probably be the edge for us mortals in the future when the machines are trying to take over us. So
And,
great, and yes, please.
no, just one very quick trivia actually. So LinkedIn has recently published its 2020 list of most in-demand skills. And what is really interesting and stands out is that analytical skill stands shoulder to shoulder to cloud computing and artificial intelligence in terms of its demand in the market right now. So
Yeah.
it really proves that.
Exactly. So that's a positive sign actually for us, that we might have some skills that will be taken over, but these skills will remain as human as we go forward. So thanks for sharing that. And now I come to you, Ruchira, about, since Samta just spoke about how it's the application of behavioral skills is not that easy. Many companies want to do it and they have the intent to do it, but then personalizing it as per every individual becomes difficult. So what are some of the top challenges that you face as HR, as an HR leader, when training employees on these particular behavioral skills?
Right, Yasmin. And most of what Samta spoke about resonated with me. What I have seen organizations really struggling with, and would put it in three buckets again. One is the simplicity of it. How can really the behavioral skills and the manifestation of these skills at the workplace can be explained in very easy and simple terms to people? I think at least in my experience, I've seen organizations really struggling with and not able to really find a solution to it. And one of it is really getting reflected in the report, where you're saying that people would want to get trained, but how are they going to personalize it is something, is a challenge which has come out when Yasmin, you presented the reports.
Yeah.
The second piece is the contextualization in this ever-changing world, where every time, and Samta very rightly mentioned that right in the past 20 years, the pace of change and the pace of improvements, pace of things that are getting introduced, and how will that getting captured and structured and taken into account while training your people, while preparing your people to tackle those areas. I think that's the entire contextualization currently. For look at this currently, the industries have undergone a change. The workplace has undergone a change. The worker has undergone a change, and the work itself is undergoing a change. Right, the skills that are required are completely different from somebody who's working remotely to somebody who's a hybrid worker who can work from anywhere, the requirements are very different. And hence the contextualization is something I think is the difficult part. The third part, which is difficult, which is tracking the progress and impact of training, really. It was anyway difficult before the COVIDian times. Now I believe it is going to be even more difficult to really put a finger at exactly this is what I wanted change, and has that really the after the training has been imparted, has that impacted in terms of changing the behavior and the skills of a particular individual. So,
Absolutely. I think that's very, very true in today's times. I think, yes, one is the intent, as I said, to train employees. And then how do you measure the impact of your training programs? I think that's also a challenge I think most HR leaders face. And so I'll come to you, Surya, about your experience and how are your employees responding to such kind of behavioral training needs today? Because the research shows that it should be started out earlier and on, though companies focus mostly on executive level. What are your views on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So companies, of course, they spend bulk of their budgets on leadership development initiatives for mid-level and senior level. But you are absolutely right. I think the investment has to definitely go into people who are starting the career, because a lot of emphasis is given to employees when they come into the organization on functional skills, on technical skills, and we attach little importance to behavioral skills. So I think Ruchira was talking about this some time ago, and then Samta was also talking about it, that since the educational institutions do not give us, professionals who are ready, so we have this challenge of, repair versus prepare. Okay, so that's where we start. And unless we really attach importance, and these young professionals do struggle, when they have come with excellent coding skills, programming skills, development skills, but what about resolving conflict? What about managing a conflict? What about coaching? What about having a difficult conversation? These are definitely challenges. How do you deal with stress? How do you deal with anxiety? So there is definitely a lot of challenge. The challenge today with the budgets getting slashed and money going into leadership development for mid-level and senior level, the junior level is left with content which is available on the LMS, which is largely online content and e-learning modules, etc., which is very static, which is not interactive, which doesn't have any measurement impact measurement criteria built into it. So that's definitely a challenge, today. So we are today trying to bring about a lot of innovation there. And I personally believe that in a large organization where you have got thousands of people, how are you really going to measure the impact? I think Ruchira was talking about that. It's extremely difficult. But I think as L&D functions, we'll have to really prioritize, and we'll also have to look at technology to um, measure effectiveness. So if you are training a large number of people in an organization on presentation skills, so can we leverage technology to check whether these young professionals are able to create presentations which meet the minimum standards? I think today it is possible, through technology. So I think we'll have to look at different options. When the L&D teams are getting smaller and smaller in size, it's obviously extremely difficult to measure effectiveness for a large population. So we'll have to really leverage technology if you have to do that.
Great, great. Thanks, thanks. I think yes, technology will play a great point there. And I also have a question around what do business leaders expect from behavioral skilling learning? So, Nikhil, maybe since you speak to a lot of business leaders in your role, what do you think? What kind of impact do business leaders look for?
So I think a lot of them, look for this idea of impact. Like, if I'm investing in a program on behavioral skills, then how would I know that something is really changing, or what's really moving the needle? So I think this idea of impact is something that people really want more information on. And our sort of take on that is just to pick up on some of the things that our panelists have said. I think is a very sort of a large thing which can take a lot of time. I think defining the tiny most element that you'd like to change is important. So really identifying what is it at the workplace that you want to change is probably the first thing that's really critical in defining what this impact is. I think the second thing is, uh, you know, uh, 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 you know, is the training interesting enough for people to want to, be part of it? I think, if you break down the three levels, am I finding the training interesting enough to want to take part in it? Have I defined my outcomes in a tiny manner to see change? So if you pick up the presentation example, then first, did I like the training on presentations? Secondly, am I able to make better presentations? And I think the third is, because I've made better presentations, has something changed at the business level? So I think identifying these three levels of impact, starting from stage one is something that is important.
Absolutely. I think that's something that L&D leaders and HR leaders have to. That kind of conversation with the business leaders is very important for them to explain these three stages of the impact. So yes, thanks for sharing that, Nikhil. Before I move on to my other question, I have a few audience questions that I'd like to take up, and they're a little very relevant. And I request Ruchira and Surya to help me with the answers. So we have Surajit who's asked, what are some behavioral indicators in the virtual world for employee engagement? So, Surya, if you would like to take it up first.
Sorry, can you repeat? Surjit is looking for the behavioral indicators.
In the virtual world for employee engagement.
Oh, okay. The behavioral indicators for employees. Okay, I
Yes,
think
yes.
it's yeah. So the first and foremost, I think as we have moved to a virtual world, the challenge has been for organizations is, how do you really drive employee experience? And what I'm seeing today is most organizations are focused, most HR functions are focused on driving events. But experience is not about driving events, it's not about fun events. Because what the employees are grappling with today at this point in time, the problems are far too different from what they used to be in the earlier world. So, they're grappling with the challenges of work-life balance. They're really struggling. There is a manager who is expecting them to work for 9 hours every day, but they also have to manage their family, they have to manage their kids, they have to manage their elderly parents, and so on. So I think there's a different kind of challenge that we are experiencing today. So it's all about, I think, in my opinion, it's all about, is the employee feeling empowered? Is the Does the employee have enough flexibility? Are we really looking at the number of hours the employee is putting into work, or the outcomes that he or she is creating? Okay, so I think empowerment, the feeling empowered is a very, very important behavioral indicator, I would say. And
I
the
absolutely,
employee happiness,
yeah.
the work-life balance, the flexibility that the employee has. And I think these are some of the things that come to my mind when we're talking about employee experience and driving that in the virtual world today.
Yes, yes, true. Thanks, Surya, for saying. Ruchira, would you like to tell us? There's another question that's come up from Tapan who says, what are some of the behavioral aspects that we can implement within the organization in new normal of since everyone's working?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think the first thing is really communication, and communication not about just about spoken and written and such thing. Look at how we are communicating now. We are communicating virtually. We do not know the non-verbal cues which are visible, otherwise would have been visible to us in a world earlier, before the COVIDian times. Now we do not know who's engaged. We do not have the facial the responses or actions that are visible to us. So understanding those nuances, reaching out to people about who's not contributing, talking to them, saying, hey, what do you think? So enabling that culture and through a very focused, structured communication nuances is something I think is important. The second thing, Tapan, I would say is the entire tenacity and empathy, both going together. I do not think we should overcompensate saying, oh, people are working overtime. Currently, with this changing scene and the challenges that every organization is facing, people would need to, in every company, would need to really give their 100% and more to bring the organization out of the crisis situation, right? So tenacity is important, but then with the same breath, or the other side of the coin is really empathy. So how do I really enable my team members and understand that they have to be, there is a certain constraints that they're working with, and try and get the best productive outcome from them. In fact, there's a huge research which has come out from the US across multiple industries, across multiple researchers, which actually is saying that productivity has gone up. So there's something which was not the case earlier, right? During the pre-COVID times, which is now, sorry, the earlier part of the COVID times. Now it is changing. People are becoming more productive. So what are those behavioral nuances that the other countries have been, or other organizations have been able to implement and measure, which is making this change happen?
Absolutely great. Thanks, Ruchira, for answering that. Samta, you work with a lot of organizations. What are some skills that you're seeing are being highlighted in terms of what organizations are asking of their employees in these this new world of work?
Yeah. No, I think very relevant, and I think Ruchira and Surya in the beginning of the conversation also mentioned some of these, and they are not different. So, as I said, I think persuasion, analytical skills, and problem solving are basically the four skills that come at the top for when you look at middle managers, etc. I think when it comes to senior leadership, the kind of interestingly the focus shifts in senior leadership. The focus shifts towards being able to communicate the vision and the goal. Sort of aligning your teams with using empathy, aligning your teams on the business outcome. So more. So in the middle management, while we see skills that are more people skills, which are directed outside, so solve a particular problem, communicate to people. When it goes to leadership, a lot of internalization sort of also happens there. So how do you understand purpose? How do you understand organizational goals? So that is largely what we are seeing. But if you look at the trends in reports and the kind of competencies typically that the companies are looking for, I think creativity, persuasion, collaboration, and problem solving still remain the top four skills.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks. I think that really answers, I hope that answers the questions for Tapan and Surajit also. Now we'll move on to the next section of my discussion with you. And this is for all of my panelists here today. We spoke about personalization and how important it is in terms of the kind of learning needs people have these days. But it is both a challenge and an opportunity for most companies. The research showed specifically that although companies want to engage in personalized learning plans, they're unable to scale up such programs. So what are your thoughts on that? Sometime maybe you could begin by answering this, and then we'll move on to the other panelists.
No, I'll just take a very quick shot at it. So I think it's particularly interesting, and as I keep repeating that, when it comes to behavior skills, everybody has a unique fingerprint, and I think that sort of definition fits well. Therefore, the need for personalization. And therefore, it's easy to deduce that when you want to personalize a certain category of skill, it's very difficult to do it in a classroom or on job because the scale cannot be managed there. So the only route that leaves us is basically doing it digitally, because technology gives you the leverage to be able to do something at scale, but also to be able to personalize it. And that's the whole sort of advantage that online education and online learning comes in with. I think what is particularly interesting, if you look at the digital learning in the space of digital learning of behavioral skills, I think what will be the key differentiator in this case is being able to apply something like applied psychology and behavior science. So I do feel like until now, behavior science was a very underrated kind of stream when it came to learning and development. But I think with the relevance of behavioral skills going up, it is going to come mainstream. And then the challenge would be that how do you combine behavior science or behavior change techniques within technology? And only that will sort of allow us to do this at scale. So,
yeah. Great, thanks. Ruchira, would you like to add to that about how do you how do organizations go about creating those personalized learning programs for the people?
Yasmin, and this is very interesting, and I kind of not really agree with
Oh,
Samta in
interesting.
this area. One of my team members recently said, and she's that's just about 5 years of experience. She said she's really wanting to understand how to develop a personal brand and how can she learn how to go about it. Now, there's no organization, at least not in my organization, that we're thinking of doing a training about creating a personal brand and how people should create a personal brand. And that's really personalization, right? That's her need. That's one part of it. How are people really have been learning? And it's a age old wisdom that people say it's 70-20-10, right? Where 70% is really happening on the job. And that 70% what is happening on the job is really happening through a chameleon effect, right? So there's a newcomer who joins the organization and sees how their bosses, the peers, the overall dynamics in the organization, just sees that, emulates that, and starts behaving in that manner, right? And that's really the cultural nuance of the organization. Is HR, is the leadership team, is the learning team of an organization able to understand those dynamics, understand those nuances which is happening in the workplace, where the person, the individual is really learning from, put a structure around it and put it on a platter. Can it be done in a digital way? And that's where I really disagree with Samta. Maybe not totally. I think there has to be creative ways of putting together the behavioral practices, uh, the advanced analytical pieces where you really get to know what an individual wants, and that's where analytics comes into this entire piece, and of course the digital technology. Having done that, I think the important piece is then put the employee in charge of her own path, her own journey, his or her own journey. That becomes, for me, I think, important. Also, another thing is most of the times the HR teams and the learning teams, they think that training is really, they are the custodians and they become really possessive about it. I think we should just democratize it. It needs to be driven centrally, but it has to be really democratized. It has to be cascaded down. People across the organization should pick up those nuances and those aspects. And earlier in the session, I spoke about the cultural aspects, the value aspects which are there, and drive it through leadership at all levels. Leadership at all levels. So right from the L1 leadership L2 to people in the hierarchy.
Great, great. Thanks, Ruchira. On that point, I'll bring you in, Nikhil. Do you agree with Samta or Ruchira? And what are your views on personalizing learning programs? Sorry.
So I agree with both in a way, because I think one of the ways to solve for personalization is looking at different elements of learning, and a digital only solution is one of the elements of learning that can be used for some segments of the workforce. If there's a certain constant that needs to get done, it's similar to what you have in university, which is core subjects and elective subjects. So if everybody has to go through the core subjects, and you can leverage digital being one of the elements. And then you have the other elements that can be brought in, whether it's live or a different mode of learning, which is conversational or other formats. So I think to me it would be a bit of both. And I think I just like to add the importance of content, right? I think the importance of the curriculum and the content to be made available that can cater to different levels of people and different sort of functions, right? So I don't think we have such a large inventory of content which is contextualized to cover all elements of the workforce to be able to make
Yes,
that happen. So I think
absolutely
there's a
agree.
need to
How
build that
about you,
out.
Surya? What do you think about this entire challenge of personalization of learning?
Yeah, well, I don't know why we call it a challenge. It's all about choosing your own pasta. You have provision for everyone, and let people come and choose. Choose your pasta, choose your sauce, choose your spices, choose whatever you want to do. So create something for everybody, and empower people so that people can come and choose not just content, not just learning intervention. They can choose a mentor, they can choose a subject matter expert, they can choose a coach, they can choose the communities of practice they want to join, they can choose the assignment they want to take up. So organizations should facilitate that. HR and L&D should facilitate that. We need to have the right policies, the right rotation policies, the right cross-pollination opportunities to take up stretch assignment. I think we just have to build the ecosystem and build the repository of solutions, identify experts, mentors who can chip in and then support. Just build the ecosystem and then empower the learner. I think we will achieve
Yeah, I think that's a
personalization.
great answer. Yes, if you give them a gamut to choose from and they can pick and choose what suits their needs, I think that is a good way to look at it. And, that will really enable that personalization in learning opportunities in companies. So that's a great point. Thanks, Surya. So sometimes we were talking about
Thank
digital
you.
learning and whether it can supplement behavioral learning. It has picked up majorly. And they say our research is showing that it is at par with classroom training or on-the-job learning, and especially thanks to the global pandemic. Could you tell us more about how digital learning is supplementing behavioral skill needs?
uh, of course, I was also honestly very pleasantly surprised to see that number in our report, which is where we are saying that on-job learning, classroom learning, and digital learning are almost equal at 64-65%, if I remember. So that's the percentage who are using these modes for behavioral learning. I think my hope comes from four clear advantages that sort of digital learning allows, especially in the behavioral training space. I think firstly is more practitioner-driven learning. So what we have is that of course, we always in the L&D space, we always had people coming in, talking and sharing. But what really that was very limiting in scale. What really allows us in terms of having more practitioner overview in a digital space is the ability to be able to use that knowledge at a scale and not have to repeat that. So I think it becomes more limitless than sort of confining it to a group of 50, 60 people. So I think more academic content, which has a larger shelf life, is the first aspect. I think second aspect I completely agree, and it's been talked about. I think the fact about contextualization. So I think digital learning, the different adaptations can make contextualization very very easy by role, by numbers of years of experience. By even just language proficiency of the learners. There could be simple content and there could be difficult content, and by proficiency. By the way, you could always do a benchmarking to say where the learner or the employee is, and make adaptive content. So contextualization is the second piece. I think the third piece is I think with more interventions that are happening in behavior science and applied psychology, the ability to be able to make people practice these skills also beyond just teaching them the concepts and the frameworks and the theoretical aspects of it. So I think that's the third sort of advantage of digital learning. Fourth is not so much an advantage, but more like a challenge. But I have a lot of belief in digital learning to be able to solve that, which is the measurement of impact. I think that's one challenge. But I feel once that challenge is solved, a combination of academic content, ability to contextualize, enabling practice, and the measurement of impact is what is really going to sort of give digital learning a stronghold in the behavioral training space.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. So I'll come back to you, Surya and Ruchira again. This is about when we think about supplementing behavioral skills with coaching, mentoring, shadowing is a critical step in the process. But our research has shown that there's a major gap in coaching enablement. So how can companies enable this need? So Surya, if you would like to answer that first.
Yeah, coaching is absolutely critical. And so sometimes we just restrict our interventions to training only. I think it has to be beyond training. And then if you have to supplement training with something, with another tool, I think coaching is a powerful tool. So organizations need to invest. L&D functions need to create enough coaches within the system. I think managers are the best people to become coaches and mentors.
Yeah.
And we need to invest in creating a pool of mentors and coaches in the organization. We need to select the right people who have passion and desire to support others, enable others is important, because it's, we need people who are committed to this. It's not just the skill, it's also the passion and the commitment. So that's important. So I think we need to really create a pool of coaches and mentors within the organization. We need to invest in training our managers to become better coaches. I
Yes.
think to a great extent we'll be able to solve that problem by doing that.
I think I totally agree. I think managers and can be the true mentors. They can be the real coaches, and if they are trained to do the right job, they can actually pass on the wisdom very nicely to the person working next to them. So thanks, Surya.
Absolutely.
Would you like to add something to that?
One of the things in my mind why coaching is not really taking up because of the heavy cost involved in training and preparing coaches in the organization, make it all pervasive, right? So that's something which is really not. But the research, Samta and Nikhil may be able to add the reasons for why really the coaching has this gap. In my mind, again, because I'm a great believer of putting everything simply, and simplicity is also something that is or maybe my organization's one of the mottos is simpler, smarter, faster. Can we have a playbook around simple things? Okay, so there's a Ritz-Carlton way, and we all know that they are very simple. Everybody just knows what needs to be done. So they say, do not point fingers, right? Point finger, really take your guest towards where the guest wants to go in the Ritz-Carlton hotel, instead of saying, just pointing, saying, oh, that's where your room is. Now, what is really it is a manifestation of customer centricity of that organization, right? So or for example, excellence. We all know about first time right. Can we really have simple, this broken into simple actions and simple behaviors? We're saying first time right. For example, pick up the phone and three rings, right? That can show your manifestation of how you believe in excellence, for example, right? Everything you would want to do first time right. Um, so yes, coaches are required, but sometimes this can be done easily and simply by having a playbook around your the nuances that you would want uh, to cascade across your people and your organization.
Yes, I think that's a great thought actually, putting down all your knowledge, your wisdom together for others who are joining in your journey to learn from how you've learned. I think that's a great thought and will help L&D leaders actually create an entire, curriculum that way for their employees. So thanks, Ruchira. Before I move on to my last question, that will be for everyone, I have one question for you, Nikhil. So how do you see the supply demand of behavioral skills training? As more companies prepare to scale up their personalized behavioral training, what are some things they should look for in service providers, according to you?
So there is obviously a big demand. As the report says, 85% of companies have behavioral training in their system. So my sense is it is a large demand.
Yeah.
I think coming to what some of the suppliers need to have, I'll go back to what Surya was mentioning around pasta. Essentially, the first thing is to be able to diagnose the needs, right? What
Yeah.
meal do I really want to eat? Do I want to eat pasta? What kind of sauce do I have? What kind of seasoning do I put in? What kind of flavors? And that relates to the contextualization of content, types of content, etc., that you bring as a partner. How easy is it to make and eat, right? And this goes back to Ruchira's point of simplicity, right? Do I have to spend a lot of time making this food and eating it, or is it really simple? So again, simplicity of the offering. And then what should I be able to do after I eat that, right? Should I be able to run, lose weight, lift weights, and how do you measure this? So in that sense, measuring impact becomes an important piece. I think the last thing around coaching and mentoring to me would be, how do you train your own workforce to become cooks themselves, where you make your own pasta as opposed to going out and getting that pasta in. So
Yeah.
that's just an analogy.
I like that point. I like the point. Become cooks yourself as well, rather than going out. So thanks. So we spoke about Nikhil. We spoke about impact. You've already given us some 3 steps of how you can measure impact. I would like my other panelists to also tell us about How do you measure the success of your behavioral learning initiatives in terms of ROI outcome? How do you do that? So maybe sometimes you could start, and then I'll move on to Ruchira and Surya.
So, yes, and I think largely when we talk about behavioral training, one could measure impact at three levels. One is that we expect that somebody who's being trained or who's actually learning the skills will automatically start seeing the change in herself or himself, which is my self-perception changes. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm collaborating better. I feel like I'm managing conflicts. I'm initiating, open and honest conversations and, dealing with difficult situations. So one is, I think the first thing that happens is your self-perception changes because
Yeah.
you start taking the initiative. The second thing that happens is that behaviors are such that behaviors are such that it is also largely observed by people who are around you. And so the second metric becomes that how are people who are around me and who work closely around me, can they validate this change? Can they validate this self-perception of change that I have? And I think that becomes very, very crucial in behavioral training, because when it comes to behaviors, the slippery slope is basically blind spots. A lot of times us, having a self-perception, no, I'm great at this, but until we only hear from other people that, we are actually not so great. So self-perception coupled with a validation from, maybe our families, our friends, our colleagues, our managers, our reportees. So that becomes the second metric. The third metric, of course, which has been talked about in the report and we've been talking about, is really the ROI and what impact it has on the business outcomes. There have been various models, and Kirkpatrick is the most spoken model when it comes to business outcomes. And but I think it's also been accepted that it's one of the most it's one of the pain points and the challenging area to track. So I think while first two are manageable and show a significant needle movement in behavior change, and how the work styles change in the workplace. The third one will be critical to see that how behavioral training institutes start mapping this to business outcomes.
Great, great, great. Thanks. Surya, would you like to add to how are you doing it at your organization? Give us a personal example of measuring ROI.
Yeah, we basically try to link this to business metrics and business objectives. So if you're running a hypo program, a high potential program, to create a pool of mid-level managers or senior level managers, so we basically would go back and then check the number of people who have gone through this program, how many of them are actually ready for the next role.
Yes.
That's one way you can measure this. If you have a program, first time managers program, and if you have made it open to your individual contributors who aspire to become managers for the first time, I think it's fairly simple. You just go and check how many people have eventually made it. So I think the way we do it is we look at business metrics, the business outcomes. So I think our both behavioral and functional training strategy is pretty much linked to the business strategy. Once the business strategy is out, and then we try and weave our L&D strategy to that, and then see what are the business objectives, and then what L&D interventions we can run, which will enable us to, which will enable the organization to achieve those objectives. That's how we look at it.
Great, great. Ruchira, what about you and your organization? How are you looking at it?
So every time we do something in my organization, we ask the question, so what? So even when we are putting up a framework for a training intervention, the framework includes what is going to change. I'll give you an example. We did with all our L1 and L2 managers about really managing their teams well, right? And why did we want to do that? Because there was a high attrition that is happening across the organization, and we said that we will need to train the people, bring them, and saying these are the behavioral aspects that you need to focus on so that your team stays with you, right? And hence the first instant itself, as the framework itself, we had outlined saying my attrition percentage going down is something that we would need to measure, and we measured it kept on measuring it at particular levels, manager wise, team size wise. So a manager who has a 5-member team vis-a-vis a manager who has more than 5-member team, is it different location wise? Is it something else which is happening in the market, which is, so we really bring in analytics and data right at the beginning and throughout the course of the intervention to see the business outcome that is supposed to get met is really has got impacted by the intervention that we have done. Of course, what Samta spoke about in terms of the second level, saying the manager himself, so the manager who's got trained, his or her manager and the peers also observing whether these nuances, the behavioral manifestations that we wanted to be improved or getting strengthened, whether that has happened or not. But there's always a struggle, Yasmin, that happens. For example, if I want to say, how do I measure agility, right? I want my people to be agile, and we make train the people on that. How do I really measure it and pinpoint it to that one variable? And I think the way it needs to be done is having the control and having a team which is going through the program. That also helps in going back to the business and saying, this is something, this is the team which has gone through the program and it has changed your business, your productivity, or whatever measure that we have outlined at the beginning of the discussion has got improved, has got changed, and hence it has to be done with all sets of people, right? So managing that discussion also becomes important. The third thing I think is really measuring the blend mix, which is more effective, and then seeing that finally how it gets the training gets imparted. I think also becomes important because currently, if I go, for example, totally digital, and the business outcome is not met, that means that I have not really my ROI has not really been great, right? So that also is something I would like to measure.
Great. Thanks, Ruchira. I think that answers the question very well. I believe we have a few audience questions before we wrap up. In the interest of time, I'll just quickly ask you those questions. I think Ketan asks about measuring ROI. You just answered that question. We have a question from Rupa who said, organization culture has a bigger role in defining behavioral skills. So how can HR tailor suit for all levels in the organization? Who would like to take that up? Surya, would you like to answer that?
So culture is a sum total of everything that we see in the organization and the people's behavior, the habits, and so on. So and then if we look at learning as a solution to all problems, I think that's definitely not the right thing to do. So that we sometimes need a larger intervention to drive certain changes. So when we talk about driving a culture change in the organization, I think it has to be top down, right from the CEO of the organization through the ranks of the organization and the leadership teams. So and then HR can probably contribute, can play a role in making some of those conversations happen.
Yes.
I think that I don't look at it as a learning solution. Well, there could be some learning solutions that can kind of weaved into it, but I think it's a larger program that needs to be driven. So when you're talking about culture, when you talk about habits, when you're talking about behaviors, so I think all the functions, HR, L&D, the leadership, they'll have to come together, and they'll have to really make sure that how leaders walk the talk, how they reinforce, how they use storytelling as a tool to kind of convey the message to the larger population in the organization. So I think it's a larger intervention than just a learning solution.
Great. Thanks, Surya. Final question that I can take. We don't have time. It's such a great conversation. I think, Nikhil, you'd be able to answer this better because we're speaking about good content in terms of the kind of behavioral skills training. So Pallavi is asking, how can we look at creating a better learner experience and not just a training event? Good content and drive from leadership is one part, but do we have any other parameters that we should be focusing on?
So I think experience is, individual to every learner, and different learners learn differently. Whether it's through a visual medium, an auditory medium, a kinesthetic medium. So I think as an experience, it would be important to have content that can build different styles of learning in a frictionless manner. I think that's one aspect if one was to think of digital. I think the second piece of this experience is how do you seamlessly translate it into application at the workplace, right? So again, with the help of, you can leverage technology, but the fusion between what you're learning online and how you're applying it to the work that you're doing, and that aha moment as an experience, I think is something one has to think
Great.
through in terms
I
of
think
design.
that's so true. Thank you so much. So with that, that's all we have time for today. With this, we wrap up today's session. Once again, I'd like to thank our partners for Harappa Education for this, and our speakers for the invaluable insights and information that they've shared with us today. Thank you, Surya. Thank you, Ruchira. Thank you, Samta. Thank you, Nikhil, so much for giving us time. And it was a pleasure having this conversation. We could have gone on for a longer time, but sadly we just had 1 hour. But thank you so much for all your insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Resma. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. And, yes. And for our audience, you can download the research report copy from the link provided. Meanwhile, you can also provide your feedback in the survey link provided in the chat section, because your inputs do matter a lot to us. And with that, we conclude today's session. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead. Thank you and bye-bye.